Hey there, I'm David, the editor of Imaging Resource, and for the last few weeks I have been using this big beauty of a lens. This is the Sony 400-800mm f6.3 to 8 GOSS, and it's a lens that really pushes the limits of focal length reach while keeping the price pretty reasonable. This is a lens that's going to be perfect for many wildlife, sports, and aviation photographers, but the low price also brings some compromises. The question for you will be, do the pros of this lens outweigh the cons? For one of my tests with the lens, I had the chance to take this thing out to the Shawnagunk Grasslands National Wildlife Refuge. When I brought this lens out, we had harriers flying really far off in the distance, and so it gave me a really unique opportunity to test out the reach on this lens. So I was there shooting with my friend Dean. He had the 200-600mm lens, and while we were there shooting, about 3 photographers showed up with Sony 600mm f4 lens. But I was able to get some shots of the harriers from far away, which the other shooters didn't even bother to try taking pictures of. The 200mm additional length on this was enough for me to grab shots of the harriers, while other photographers were grabbing a snack. So let's start with autofocus. It is solid. When you pair it with Sony's AI subject detection autofocus, this lens locks onto small subjects with precision, tracking them across the frame. Shooting at 30 frames a second and higher, I consistently captured sharp images of birds in flight. Image quality is excellent for a lens at this price point. Edge sharpness is good, chromatic aberrations are minimal, and the overall detail is solid. The maximum f8 aperture at 800mm really reduces the amount of incoming light. This makes it necessary to bump up the ISO for fast-moving subjects. When I was out photographing birds at 1/2000th of a second or faster, I was often seeing the ISO starting at above 2500 and going up to like 6000, 8000. So that's not technically image quality, since you get the same noise with any other lens at the same ISO, but on an overcast day with f8 being wide open, you can really get a noisy image easily where you wouldn't if there was something like an 800mm f4. On another mostly cloudy day, I took the lens to the Central Park Zoo so I could photograph some animals that are more stationary, so I could slow down the shutter speed, and so I could talk a little bit about image quality. Image quality is excellent. On these snow monkeys, you can make out the details on their faces, you can see individual hairs. I particularly like to photograph the sea lions, as I think that they're adorable, but also because you can catch individual water droplets like these. The sea lions aren't always great tests of image quality because the water sort of like sticks to their bodies and it makes them look a little bit like they're out of focus, but they're not. But when they're up on a platform or they're poking their head out of the water, you can tell how sharp this lens is. These shots of birds are exceptionally vivid and exceptionally sharp. And if you find this sort of honest, real-world review helpful, hit the like and the subscribe buttons for more. From a construction standpoint, this lens is impressive. It's got the same weather resistance of the 200-600, which I've used in rainy, damp, and cold conditions, so I have no worries about the construction of this lens. Don't tell Sony, I also did drop it a little bit when it was in a camera bag, and it's fine. But again, that's between you and me. The internal zoom on this lens also makes it more comfortable to use than Sony's 100-400mm GM lens. An external telescoping design just means that as you turn the zoom, the lens gets longer or shorter, which makes it kind of annoying to use, because as you're photographing something, the lens extends and it sort of pulls the camera down. This lens does not do that. Also, this lens weighs about 5.5 pounds, which is about 2.5 kilograms, so it's hefty, but it's not unmanageable. On the side of the lens, just like the 200-600, are switches for autofocus and manual focus, switches for the stability, and also switches for the distance that this lens will focus. Okay, so the 200-600 and the 400-800 perform almost identically. The 400-800 seems just slightly slower to focus than the 200-600, but the 400-800mm lets in less light when fully open, and lower light is more problematic for autofocus. At 800mm, those extra 200mm really exaggerate even small movements from the photographer. It's harder to focus on something when you're shaking, and when you're using a longer lens, any shaking that you do is magnified. Think of it like a teeter-totter, and if you have somebody at the end of the teeter-totter and they're bouncing up and down, they're moving more than if somebody right at the pivot pushes up and down on the teeter-totter. That's a terrible example. So a lot of the people that are using this lens, I think, are going to hand-hold it, so that makes the focusing here less accurate just because of the fact that when you're hand-holding it, you're probably going to move a little bit. Alright, so it goes like this. The 600mm f4 is the pinnacle of Sony's long glass when it comes to focus speed. Behind that, but still impressive for a lens that's a fraction of the cost of the 600mm, is the 200-600. And then just a little bit behind that, or maybe exactly equal at the same aperture, is this, the 400-800mm. So who's the lens for? Alright, so if you're a Sony shooter looking for the longest possible focal length, this lens isn't just an option, it is the option. For wildlife and sports shooters who want reach without breaking the bank, this is an easy recommendation. If your budget allows for a 600mm f', that's still the better option for ultimate image quality. But if you need something more affordable and versatile, maybe something $10,000 less, the Sony 400-800mm f6.3 to 8 GOSS is an outstanding lens. Sony's 200-600mm lens is also an astounding lens, it's just not quite as long and not quite as much fun. And like the 200-600mm lens, this lens is compatible with Sony's 1.4 and 2.0 teleconverters, which could give you reach up to 1600mm, which is crazy, but doable. Alright, so what's the longest focal length that you have in your camera bag, and where do you use it? For Imaging Resource, I'm David, and until next time, happy shooting.